Welcome to Houston Sports Talk with your host, Robert Land.
Thanks for checking into the best Houston sports podcast, part of the National BLeav Network, and joining me to dissect the Texans draft, our favorite NFL draft guru, Joe DeLeone. Find his work at his YouTube channel, A to Z Sports Film Room. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but it's great to see you, Joe, and have you decompressed a little bit since the draft?
I've been trying to. It's hard to really truly slow down after the draft because a lot of people want to break down how their draft classes were and the expectations for the upcoming season. But so far, it's been a nice breath of fresh air to stop talking about the 2025 guys and look a little bit ahead to the 2026 prospects that could do some great things.
Man, it's going to be interesting to hear your thoughts on the Texans draft because Caserio had those 7 draft day trades, which led the NFL. And since Caserio became the Texans GM, his 25 draft day trades are only second to the Eagles GM, Howie Roseman. This is why I always find it comical to see all these Texans mocks on my social media timeline leading up to the draft. What a waste of time this is. I don't get it. Like, I know what Caserio is going to do, and it's not going to be what you think. And I'm curious, Joe, how do you like his aggressiveness?
Yeah, I thought that one of the things with this draft class is that there were a lot of quality day 2 players that you could get that could go on to be good starters. And when you're a team like the Texans that already has high level, high impact young guys like CJ Stroud and Will Anderson, you just need to fill the gaps and to find players that are going to give you highlight level plays that are just going to be able to put out consistent performances on a week-to-week basis. You just need those guys that are going to be average to slightly above average throughout the course of the year. You didn't need to go and find an all-pro. So in a class like this, trading back had a ton of value. It had value in accumulating all the day 2 picks that they had. They were able to find what is likely going to be future starters. And some of the other moves that they made moving up to get Woody Marks, it is the ideal right fit for what they needed in their running back room. So I really like what Caserio did in understanding the strengths of the class and being able to position it in a spot where they can find the guys that can help take this team from young and exciting into one of the best teams in the AFC.
The story starts with him trading out of the first round. He takes wide receiver Jayden Higgins early second. What do you think of that move and Higgins?
Yeah, I think that trading out of that first round was, again, very smart move by them. Allow for the Giants, who are desperate to find their quarterback, completely reap the rewards of a team that is unsettled in that situation. I think that Jayden Higgins is a great pick for what they need. I think that one of the biggest takeaways from this off season or the past season as well is that there's a lot of inconsistency with the health of Nico Collins and especially Tank Dell. His availability for this year seems like he's not really going to be available. Having younger faces, but also high impact younger faces, I think is going to be huge for them. Jayden Higgins from Iowa State was one of the few guys for me that I thought could come in right away, end up being a 700-800 yard plus receiver, and then eventually develop into a premier X receiver on the outside. I love his route running. I love his concentration for a 6'4" player. He is so smooth at transitioning in and out of his breaks. And I think that play style is going to fit nicely with the current group of guys that they have on the roster.
There's some Nico Collins comps. Do you see that at all?
I do, but I think that Nico Collins is a little bit more of a different threat down the field. I think that where Jayden Higgins is going to thrive and he's going to succeed the most is winning along the sideline and winning over the middle of the field with his route running.
Don't know if you've heard the word, but we're kind of desperate for offensive linemen that do their job. And the Texans find maybe a gem in Golden Gopher tackle Aireontae Ersery. What did you think about him?
Yeah, I think that again in this this whole theme for this draft class is just finding high floor players. And Ersery was one of the few tackles that really fit that description. This tackle class was not good. And it's seemingly when they trading out of the first round was that indicator of, all right, we don't like the options available to us. We don't want to take the risk on Josh Simmons, who was a commonly projected player for them by a lot of people, including myself. The injury is not something that you can really truly bank on if you're a team like the Texans that needs somebody to play right away. Ersery, I think, shows great length. He shows just overall strong understanding and awareness of how to win with his frame. I think that for what this current Texans roster needs, I think that he could step in maybe at right tackle at the start of the year, allows for you to move and shuffle around some of the other faces. And in a way, whoever the weakest link is amongst those interior guys, you could just end up benching sounds a little bit extreme, but like you can end up bumping them out of the lineup and then end up moving around based on if Ersery is ready to go or not.
Any chance he could play guard?
He's a little too long for me for a guy that like I would want to play guard. And I think that he's also a player that I think succeeds a lot better when he's in space and he is able to use his length to win in pass protection. He just doesn't scream a player to me that I would make that transition and bump in. Blake Fisher is the first candidate that I would have that I'd be bumping inside. And I know that it seemingly is maybe a little bit of a sore subject with him when he was at Notre Dame. From what I was told, that at one point Notre Dame had wanted him and approached him to play guard, and he has the frame and the build to be a good guard, but he wanted to play tackle. He thought that he could be a really good tackle. He ended up being a second-round pick because he had that confidence in himself. But now, as this Texans offensive line needs to be better, he's the first guy that I bump inside and allow Ersery to play right tackle.
In the third round, they take Higgins' teammate, Jaylin Noel, another Iowa State wide receiver. What do you think about that?
Noel was one of my favorite prospects in this class, and I was really stunned that he was still on the board there. And I think that the Texans quite possibly were stunned as well. I don't think that they came into this draft thinking, hey, we need to get two receivers, but having a player like him who is super physical, has great concentration, is very explosive in short areas, is going to plug in and eventually maybe take over that slot receiver role. I think he reminds me a lot of Steve Smith, the former Panthers and Ravens receiver who wasn't afraid to hit people, was always going to get in people's faces whenever he felt that he had the chance to power through them and break tackles. I had the chance to actually have Jaylin Noel on the A to Z Film Room channel. We had a couple of interviews, and he was one of them that we were the most excited about. And he talked about how he and Jayden Higgins have such a great relationship. And I think that not only getting one of those guys or the other, you're getting both of them, and they already have an established chemistry and they love playing with one another. I think that that is such an underrated takeaway from this draft class.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about the fact that one of their old teammates, or I think it was at least Jalen's old teammate, Xavier Hutchinson, his job might be in jeopardy because these two buddies are coming in. It's kind of crazy.
Right. Ironic that it's exciting that these Iowa State guys are all coming in, but yeah, he's probably the first one who's maybe not on the chopping block, but like is going to get probably pushed down in what's now a super, super crowded receiver room.
Yeah, no question about that. I want to talk about some more of these guys in a second, but before we roll on, just a quick reminder that even though the Rocket season is over, the NBA playoffs are still a great chance to win big. Every three-pointer and buzzer beater is an opportunity for you to win at MyBookie. Place your bets live as the action unfolds. Are you feeling confident? Lock in your winnings early with our quick cash out option. Never miss a chance to turn your basketball knowledge into real cash. And hey, are you new to MyBookie? Well, sign up with our promo code MM50 and instantly boost your first deposit. It's right there in the show description, MM50. If you deposit $50, MyBookie tosses in an extra $25. Toss in an extra $50 if you deposit $100. More action, more excitement, more chances to win during basketball's intense playoff season. Plus, when the games wrap up, keep the winning streak alive at MyBookie's casino with slots, blackjack, roulette, and more. The thrills never stop. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. All right, Joe, the Texans made a trade to move up in the third round for USC quarterback Jaylin Smith, probably Caserio's most questioned move, considering where some scouts had Smith. What round did you have Smith, and how did you feel about the deal?
Yeah, he was a mid to late day 3 guy, but I think that this is just generally an underrated player. I think that it's easy to just be generally critical of a guy who wasn't in the premier group of top corners that we were being discussed by most media members, but you're still getting a pretty shifty athlete, a guy that I think could plug in the slot for you. Not the longest player that you're getting in Smith, but the 4.4 speed is something that shows up on tape for him. I think that one thing that's been super notable with Caserio and D'Amico Ryans just overall is that they have taken guys that haven't exactly been premier, just like super hyped up players, and then they've turned them into quality starters. Like Kalen Bullock was a guy who last cycle that a lot of people, a teammate of Smith's, also from USC, that I think a lot of people had low expectations for, and he goes on to have a really good rookie season. So this could end up being a really underrated, just at the very least, depth play for boosting and rounding out the secondary.
Caserio then uses next year's third-round pick to jump into the fourth round and draft USC running back Woody Marks. In an interview this week, Caserio said a future third is a present value fourth. I have no idea what he meant by that, Joe. Maybe you can decipher it, but you seem to like Brooks, right? Was he worth that third?
I really do like Brooks. And I think that there was, at the moment of this trade, there was just a lot of like freak out. I think there were a lot of people that were just like, oh, why would you do that? I think that for what this running back class was like with the depth, the other caveat with it is that if you had a specific player that you highly valued their skill set, you should prioritize going after them. Woody Marks was not, again, another player that wasn't in that conversation of one of the top 10 running backs in the consensus. But when you already have Joe Mixon, you've got your thumper, having a player who is as dynamic of a receiver and as productive of a receiver as Woody Marks, that is a skill set that your running back room needed. You need to have this third down weapon that you can use on screens, that you can maybe even motion into the slot, all of those things. I think for the average team, Woody Marks probably doesn't make sense where they took him. But taking him in the fourth round and making that move to go up and get him works really well for this team, because you're just trying to create so many different weapons. I think that like the biggest thing that this signaled to me with drafting two receivers of two different body types and then now a high impact receiving running back is that you now have all the artillery to attack downfield. I think that the Texans are going to be super explosive and aggressive through the air. And I think that this pick especially is a key signal for that.
And an underrated part of this, and I have to think this plays into it, Joe, is CJ Stroud. You're on the clock with him with this cheap contract. You want to go after something big while you can. So, hey, a third rounder's nice next year. But if you have a guy that you can get this year and have him an extra year before Stroud hits that big contract, I think that's a big deal.
Yeah, and like that's like the biggest part with me with this entire draft class is that like your defense has been pretty strong. You've had the ability to maximize outcomes from a number of players that the expectations were kind of low for. And I think offensively, there was just a lot left to be desired. And it showed up in the way that you and I have talked about this before. It showed up in the way that they played against the Chiefs in the playoffs, is that like their offensive line underperformed, again, inconsistent health availability for the receivers. So understanding that instead of like being overly aggressive like last offseason and trading for a Stephon Diggs, why not try to target some of the explosive talent that's in the draft class? Try and find as many different avenues and gadgets and pieces as possible. Sometimes having a big premier name is not always the solution. I think that the Kansas City Chiefs, who they lost to in the playoffs, are a good example of that, where they know how to maximize very specific skill sets to perform very specific concepts in very specific parts of the game. When you have so many different tools, it allows for somebody like CJ Stroud to hit their stride, to hit their potential. And this is looking even further down the line. When eventually you get to the spot where you do have to pay CJ Stroud, you are able to pick and choose which guys you bring back. If Jayden Higgins turns out to be a 1,200-yard receiver, he ends up being really good, and you have to kind of decide, like, what do we do with him? You've got so many other players, so many other quality options that you could theoretically trade a guy like that and recoup value. So my whole point with this is that when you're able to develop and find different players for different skill sets, you're able to maximize it in so many different ways, not only on the field, but in the future when you're trying to build your roster.
The sixth round, Texans took safety Jaylin Reed. And from what I read, Joe, the draft analyst really loved Reed as a steal at that point. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I thought that Reed was one of my top 10 safeties in this class. And I know that safety wasn't like a super pressing need. And I don't think that he is going to be a guy who starts. So taking him in the sixth round is good value for him, and playing amongst a group of defensive backs that have been really productive you're going to be able to get the most out of him. That was his role with Penn State this past year. They had some really good defensive line play. They had some really good corner play. And Jaylin Reed showed some pretty good instincts. He flew around the field. I believe he was a 4.4 guy. He ran a 4.49 at the NFL Combine. Underrated jumps, jumping over 33 inches. So you're getting some explosiveness and some underrated athleticism with him being a depth piece within that defense. So I absolutely think that was an underrated pick. There were some other safeties that went ahead of him that I would have much rather valued Reed, and he could end up being, like a lot of these DBs that we've talked about over the past couple of drafts, are just a quality name for a successful defense.
Yeah, also a great pass rusher at safety, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Jalen Pitre in that way. Maybe he can play sort of that role or something similar, I would think.
Yeah, and having dynamic blitzers at safety is something that's hard to come by. Not a lot of guys like to hit. Not a lot of guys are willing to get physical, and Jaylin Reed has the frame to do that. Like, he is a guy that's over 6 foot. He's listed at over 210 pounds. Like, this is a bigger dude for your typical either nickel safety or free safety type of a prospect.
The strangest pick from a lot of Texans fans, and maybe this is from draft experts as well, was the 6th round pick of Florida quarterback Graham Mertz. And Joe, I'm guessing that they like him as a future backup and a replacement for Davis Mills, since Mills has got just one more year on his rookie contract. What did you think of Mertz, and how would he compare to Mills in your mind?
Well, first of all, he's going to be a cheaper option than trying to keep Davis Mills. We always see that these backup guys that have starting experience, I'm not saying that somebody's going to go sign him to start, but you never know when he enters free agency that somebody doesn't bring him in as competition or just an unsettled quarterback room to have, a couple of options. So it's good to have this cheap player, this cheap prospect to turn to in the future when that situation arises. I would imagine that Mertz probably is going to be a practice squad guy. He was really underrated when he was coming from Wisconsin and going to Florida. No one had expectations he was going to be good. He was almost clowned on that was all Billy Napier was able to get. And his accuracy, his decision-making, it improved greatly. Him not finishing the year as a starter had nothing to do with him. It had everything to do with DJ Lagway being super talented and him suffering injuries throughout the year. So I think that there's something to be tapped into. You don't need a high upside starter. I think that he fits the description of a guy who sticks around for a long time, who found success in the SEC, that could work on this roster.
Would he have gotten drafted, do you think, if the Texans didn't draft him in the 6th? Could he have been an undrafted free agent?
I think somebody still would have taken him. I think that knowing how few options there were at quarterback, I really do think that somebody would have still taken him, because, again, there's just, this class was awful. As you started to kind of get into the 6th, 7th round, there just were not many players of his experience level, of his traits level, of all of those things that you could hope to turn into a backup. I think that there just were a lot of dart throws. I mean, to the point where Cam Miller from North Dakota State was a bit of an unexpected draft pick who went to the Raiders, is a good example of that. There just was such a short amount of options for teams trying to solve that problem.
Just want to remind our listeners real quick, what do you think of Joe's takes on this draft? What do you think of the draft in general? Let me know in the YouTube comments. You can support us and get updates on every show that drops by subscribing on YouTube, of course, and give us a thumbs up and listen while you're out and about with your favorite podcast app. Okay, Joe, the 7th round picks were defensive tackle Kyonte Hamilton and tight end Luke Lachey. Any potential steals with these two? What was your thought there?
Yeah, Lachey has been a guy who's been underrated overall, has not had the production that I think a lot of people had hoped. It's easy to get excited about an Iowa tight end. Kyonte Hamilton was a decent player as well. Got to see him at the Rutgers Pro Day when I went. Didn't stand out to me a ton, but both of these players, knowing where the strengths are right now on the Texans roster and like looking at their depth chart, I find it hard to believe that Lachey even makes the team at tight end, considering the multiple years of investments that they've had bringing in Dalton Schultz and drafting Brevin Jordan and Cade Stover over the past couple of years. And I don't know if Hamilton's going to be able to really crack the mix of defensive tackles with the way that this roster has been built through the interior and along their defensive line. I think they're both decent players. I think Lachey does have some potential. If I were to pick one of the two that like unexpectedly stuck around and maybe found a role in this team, maybe even as the second tight end, it probably would be Luke Lachey.
Yeah, Lachey could benefit from the fact that somebody gets injured and he gets a chance. And also, if he can stick around on the practice squad for a year, Dalton Schultz, that contract they might be able to get out. I think that they can get out of by next year. How would you grade the Texans draft overall?
They were one of the few teams. I had 5 teams that I gave A's to. My reasoning for this in a draft class where there was a very finite number of guys that felt like all pros. There were some traitsy players that we're hoping to ending up developing, but in a year where it was mostly good level starters, this is exactly what the Texans needed to do. Not only did you end up getting great value with some of your picks with Aireontae Ersery, where you took him, with Jaylin Noel, where you took him way later than I think everybody expected. The ability to get a guy like Jayden Higgins and to turn this receiver room into a good one into what now feels like a dangerous one with so many different options. I felt like you needed to address offensive line within the first 3 rounds, and you get a good high floor starter. That is a heck of a selection by them. And I really liked most of their day 3 picks. I know that there's easy ways to nitpick their approach, but a Graham Mertz pick is one that's not going to get highly regarded, but could end up being one in a few years that we talk about as like, man, he's just been a really nice third guy that stuck around for a really long time, or maybe even the backup that you're talking about. Like, man, I'm glad that we took Graham Mertz because we haven't had to ask that question of who is our backup quarterback. And especially the biggest one for me is Woody Marks. I really think that Woody Marks is going to turn into a super dynamic receiver. He is exactly what they needed. They didn't need to go and draft one of the other bigger thumpers that were in the class. They didn't need to go and maybe even try to address bringing in one of the speedsters like Bashal Tootin or one of those guys, or Dylan Sampson. I think that having Marks and having that new receiving option, the reliability that he brings to the table as a receiver, is, again, another thing that this team exactly needed. I feel like when you and I spoke and I came on before the draft, I felt like a lot of the things that we discussed, they came out of this class with solutions and also guys that can contribute day one that can help this team finally reach their goals. I don't think that this is an immediate Super Bowl roster, but within the next couple of years, this is another foundation that starts to elevate the team to take them to the next level.
What did you think about the rest of the teams in the AFC South, the Texans competition, Colts, Jaguars, Titans? Titans get another quarterback for the second time in a couple of years. How do you feel about him, and how he compares to, say, Will Levis when you remember him coming out?
Yeah, I think that Cam Ward is a lot more natural of a player than Will Levis. I think that Cam Ward is exactly the pick they needed to have. They were more of in the B range, and I had a lot of teams that I gave Bs to because they just did a good enough of a job, but they didn't really find the premier edge rush talent, high impact guy. Now they got Femi Oladeja, who's a great player, but it kind of made you wonder, what else could they have captured if they had addressed that sooner in the draft? I thought that they did a good job of starting to lay the foundation for, and could unexpectedly end up being a good team this year, kind of like CJ Stroud was as a rookie and Jaden Daniels was as a rookie. They could end up surprising people because Cam Ward is to me a player who could have an early impact. I thought that the Jaguars' decision to trade up and get Travis Hunter was extremely aggressive, but it's a bit high risk. Them giving up next year's first rounder, you better hope that you're in the playoff conversation. You give Trevor Lawrence a weapon, but the rest of their draft class kind of left a lot to be desired. But I will admit, the Colts were one of the only other 5 teams that I gave an A grade to. They were one of the teams that I thought, like, man, you needed to find a way to provide options and consistency to Anthony Richardson. Tyler Warren's how you do that. Tyler Warren, with up and down erratic quarterback play from Drew Aller last year with Penn State, he stepped up to the plate and had a ton of big plays in big moments where they needed him. Jalen Travis from Iowa State was a guy that I really liked who could end up starting for them, depending on how they want to move around that offensive line and figure out who fits where. And then I'm also a very big fan of what they did by getting DJ Giddens, where Jonathan Taylor is kind of approaching this point where the wear and tear starts to build up. You now have another guy of a relatively similar profile, not the same level of explosiveness, but can end up taking carries away to create more balance on offense. So that would be the one team for me in the AFC South that like really felt like they did all of the right things alongside what the Texans did.
Yeah. Quarterback. It's, I always point out that, hey, the Colts, they continue to look for a quarterback, but do I feel bad for them? After about 20 years of Peyton Manning and Andrew Luck, no, that's a big fat zero. And, I'm still ticked off that, as soon as Peyton leaves, they fall right into Andrew Luck. You get the first pick only so many times in the course of history. The Texans have had 3 number 1 overall picks, and all 3 times it was a terrible, terrible quarterback draft class. And they got Andrew Luck and Peyton Manning. So, it sucks. He's at Joe DeLeone. It's the A to Z Sports Film Room, right?
A to Z Sports Film Room. Yep.
Tell us a little bit about it and anything else that you want to plug.
Yeah, so me and my co-host Ryan Roberts, we transitioned to talking about the 2026 guys. So if you want to kind of take a look, if you're a college football fan, you want to find out like, hey, who are the big names to know? We are getting you educated and prepared over what's going to be a slow summer, but an exciting one because there's just so much that we get to talk about with much less distractions of an actual draft coming up. At A to Z Sports Film Room channel on YouTube and at Joe DeLeone on X, you can find me where I'll be promoting all my stuff. It's been so great to catch up. Appreciate you having me on as always. And as I always say every single time, I'm excited what the Texans did, and I'm hoping that they can capitalize on it and have a huge year.
You're a machine, man. It's always fun to have you on. And it's amazing how you keep up with all this stuff. And we can't tell you how much we appreciate you taking the time for our little show. I really appreciate it, Joe.
Of course. Thanks, Robert.
You're listening to Houston Sports Talk.
Hey, don't forget to support us by subscribing and commenting on YouTube. You can always listen to us on Spotify, Apple, or your favorite podcast app. Tell your friends about us and share our show links on social media. Spread the word, everybody. Thanks for listening.